Hey everyone, my name is Nick Solero. I'm a general partner and chief investment officer here at Drive Capital. This week we've gotten a lot of questions around the potential tariffs that may or may not be implemented during the Trump administration, as well as the potential recession as a result of those tariffs. And so we've thought pretty deeply about the potential implications or not of these tariffs around our portfolio. Now, if there's a silver lining that came out of the COVID crisis, and if you remember the supply chain crunch that came out of that, our portfolio, and I'm sure it's representative of a lot of portfolios, they're actually pretty darn aware of where their stuff comes from. Certainly the companies that are dealing in any sort of hardware or hard goods. This was something that we never really thought about in a flat world pre-COVID, but now that globalization seems to be on retreat and we're not as friendly with places like China, a lot of our companies have actually already done a fairly comprehensive audit of where their supply chain risks might lie. And a lot of the decoupling from places like China, where we have existing tariffs, has already happened. So my guess is that for most companies in startup land, certainly the ones that have no hardware exposure, the tariff impact is going to be maybe acute for very specific companies, but likely is very little for all the companies in general. And for the ones that do have exposure, they probably have pretty good visibility on how they can move the sources of those components elsewhere. I think areas of particular interest, if I'm looking at companies in our portfolio or yours, is I still think a lot of the world's camera systems for things like computer vision is going to be overly dependent on jurisdictions that now might be more exposed. Things like steel and hard goods, that's going to be fairly niche, certainly within the Drive portfolio, and I imagine in venture portfolios more broadly. Things that might be a little bit further out on the horizon, but are just kicking around in the back of my head, is what exactly is going to be taxed? I read some of these press releases and it changes all the time. So by the time you watch this video, it might be out of date. But I see reference to tariffs on goods and services. Well, what are services? For companies that might have leaned into a virtual workforce, that have employees around the world, insofar as their services are taxed as services, the distributed workforce might actually be more exposed to some of these taxes than folks that have been maintaining a more US-centric or in-office footing. Those reasons for hiring overseas talent for things like cost might actually start working against you. So something to keep in mind. At Drive, we have been very much out front leading with an in-office culture. So I think on balance, our portfolio is going to be relatively less exposed to that, but certainly not entirely. We have 160 companies. Despite our advice, there's going to be a number of them that have leaned into a virtual workforce and are hiring or employing people overseas that now need to be thinking about taxing of that labor. What actually happens? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
But one of the things that we look for at Drive is these are catalysts, right? And if you've heard us talk about our investment methodology, looking for large markets that are undergoing some sort of external shocks to the system that basically upset the apple cart, where all of the old rules no longer apply and the new rules need to be discovered or need to be set by new players. This is what gets us excited. This sort of disruption is where David is able to beat Goliath. Maybe it's the eternal optimist in me, but perhaps a silver lining to a new tariff regime is that there are lots of industries that are going to have to undergo fundamental change, and those are the opportunities for fast-moving, hyper-focused, hopefully drive-backed startups can go in and make their hay. What about the potential recession that we either are or are not in? I get this question all the time from friends, family, and colleagues, and I tend to not be super focused on recessions, frankly. At Drive, our number one North Star when investing in any business is what is the market size? What is the ultimate market opportunity? And that opportunity needs to be measured in billions of dollars of available revenue from North American customers. That's not because we're focused solely on North America, but if we have a massive local TAM, then the global TAM is going to be that much juicier. In the context of a recession, we're talking about the market overall GDP shrinking a few percent. If you start with a $5, $10, $50 billion TAM and you shrink that by 3%, it shouldn't matter. If you are a small, nimble startup that has found product market fit, you're basically growing from zero. Think about a balloon. If you shrink that balloon by 3%, it's still a balloon with lots of air in it. And if you're starting as a pea-sized company in the middle of it, there's plenty of market for you to go eat. So if I hear recession as an excuse for why we're missing numbers or for reasons why things are growing more slowly, my spidey sense starts to go up saying, no, that's an excuse. We're using that to paper over some other challenge that is probably far more in our control as opposed to something that is out of it. You need to find product market fit. You need to solve critical pain points. Those pain points exist whether the market is growing by 3% or shrinking by 3%. And if you can do that, then you're going to be just fine. But to wrap things up, I think tariffs are going to impact startup land in a more idiosyncratic way for specific companies in specific instances, as opposed to a more systemic way where the entire industry needs to readjust. And from a recession perspective, if you feel like recession is shrinking your business, it probably means that you're in a small market, or you don't have product market fit, or you're not solving a critical pain point. Because if you got those three things in your favor, market up 3%, market down 10%. Shouldn't matter, you'll be fine. Go get them.